Ron, would you like to introduce our guest?
Thank you, President Jack. Dr. Anthony Borgognoni,
Get up here.
on my glasses. He's an optometric physician specializing in the treatment of ocular diseases and vision disorders. He has a list of accolades so long that would cut into his speech, so I'll just mention one of them, which is the Optometric Recognition Award for Educational Excellence. He's won 24 times. But for today, that's not important. Today, he's the co-executive director and CEO of the Italians of Sunnyside Foundation and co-author, along with his mother, of this book, The Italians of Sunnyside. By the way, his grandparents, my grandparents, are on the cover of this. So we all have very unique stories of how the heck we got here and how we got to the United States. This is his and mine. I hope this will encourage everybody, if they don't know theirs, to find it and maybe bring it to the club, because Rotary is about peace through understanding and diversity. So welcome, Anthony.
Buongiorno, buongiorno. It's so great to be with all of you here. We got a fascinating history, and I hope you'll enjoy. Let's see if I can get my screen up. I want to thank the Rotaries for having me with you. I want you to know that the economic engine of America is from entrepreneurs and business people such as yourself. And in a business climate like California, my hat is off to you all. So let's talk a little bit about a history that has been purposely hidden, going all the way back to Teddy Roosevelt. It was purposely buried by the President of the United States and a powerful U.S. Senator. And let's see if we can get this going. Someone give me the thumbs up that we're live and good.
You got it.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So this book has come out just roughly 1 year ago. It is already selling 5 times faster than the average author. We're very proud of this. It recently came out about 3 months ago in Italian, so it in Mississippi River and the state of Mississippi. And one feature about a landmark that is very prominent is this Lake Chico. And as you can see here, it is in the form of a giant C. And this landmark, it is the largest natural lake in the state of Arkansas, and it is the largest oxbow lake in the United States of America. It's a very fascinating Jeopardy question that comes about every now and then, and that's back in this little small town called Sunnyside or Lake Village, Arkansas. Now, this the landscape here is very important, because if you see on the far right, you see this same map, and it is inside this sea. That was the homes, or 12 and a half acre plots for each Italian family that established a colony, an Italian colony at Sunnyside Plantation in Arkansas. And that plantation is all encircled by water. The big sea of the lake, as you can see, and running along the side there in your middle picture is the mighty Mississippi River. This is critical because this Sunnyside Plantation essentially became an Italian prison, because there was only one entryway in and one entryway out, and you can see that down in the far right-hand corner of your screen in that middle picture. Here's another blow-up of the map, the Sunnyside Plantation. It ran 30 miles from north to south, and it ran 15 miles east to west. Now, I know California is a great landmass, but as far as farming is concerned, this is enormous, even by today's standards. So 30 miles north to south, 15 miles east to west.
Recording in progress.
Let's see. My slideshow has stuck. Something popped up on my screen, Peter, that said there was something being recorded and I cannot now advance. Any clues? Let me see if I can try something here. There we go. Now, the reason the Italian colony was established in southeast Arkansas at Sunnyside is because of this, King Cotton. And an interesting fact about cotton is that in 1790, there was not a single boll of cotton produced in the United States. But by 1860, it became the number one export in the nation. And it was just not agricultural exports. Cotton became accountable for 57% of all exports. That's industrial, all economic activity, all agricultural. Cotton composed 57% of all export revenue. Arkansas was the number 2 producing state of cotton in the nation. Sunnyside Plantation, before the Civil War, had 500 slaves. It was an elite cotton producing plantation, and it was famous and powerful. And I want you to get a perception of how powerful the Sunnyside Plantation was. If you look at these companies, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Walmart, regarding the percentage of capital and economic business in the United States, Sunnyside was bigger in 1860 than these companies are today. Sunnyside was a massive business. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a history of the Sunnyside Plantation from 1860 to 1895, and then we're going to contrast it with what we had going on in Italy at this time. Well, in 1860, the Sunnyside Plantation was owned by Elisha Worthington. It was powerful and strong, but the Civil War broke out. And the way to get victory over the South was to destroy the economic engine of the South, and that was the plantations. So Sunnyside's infrastructure and the plantation was essentially destroyed in the mid-1860s. And after the war, Elisha Worthington died very shortly thereafter, and there was an ownership fight for the Sunnyside Plantation. Well, the Calhoun Land Company, which some of you may remember from your history, it came in to be the great savior of the South. And the Calhoun Land Company is told about in Mark Twain's book, Life Along the Mississippi. And it had this great plan that it was going to reunite the African Americans with the former Confederate landowners and bring harmony back to the plantations. Well, the Calhoun Land Company purchased the Sunnyside Plantation. It was financed by a New York banker named Austin Corbin. The African American says, no, thank you. We're tired of the plantation life. They dispersed. The Calhoun Land Company went bankrupt, and the plantation fell into the hands of the banker Austin Corbin. He acquires the plantation. And this all occurred between 1860 and 1895. Now, in Italy at this same time, the Italian Revolution was going on. A civil war also occurred in Italy at the same time. And we think of Italy being around for centuries, going back to the Holy Roman Empire, but that's not the case. Italy was pretty much an emperor nation back in those medieval times, but in the previous century, back in the 1800s, it was basically a nation of many kingdoms. And there was a civil war that broke out in 1861, and the government, and there was total chaos there from 1860 to 1895, much like there was in the United States. Italy basically evolved into a system of nobility where you had the very rich and nobles. It had a very small tradesman class, but it had a huge class of peasants. The entire nation, like the United States, was damaged due to war. There was immense poverty throughout Italy. And one thing different than the United States, though, the people, the peasants in Italy were not allowed to own their homes, nor were they allowed to own land. So it was, by contrast, in America, where there was tons of land, tons of work, and you had the ability to own your own home and your own land. It was an opportunistic time for Italians to be lured to America to seek a better life. So we moved back to the Sunnyside Plantation. The banker Austin Corbin was at the helm. The South was in shambles. We're in the early 1890s. And there was no one, because the economy was pathetic at that time, there was no one willing to buy the plantation. And so Austin Corbin thought, well, how hard can farming be? So he decided to become a farmer. And his first great idea to bring back the labor force for his plantation was to utilize prisoners from the Arkansas prison system. correction system. Well, the prisoners were not very motivated, and that failed within a year. And also during this time, land became very cheap because there was not any labor, and Austin Corbin kept doubling down and expanding his plantation, and it grew to over 13,000 acres. That's massive. But now with all that land, he needed to find a labor force fast. Well, Austin Corbin, as a great banker and financier, a worldwide financier, he actually knew people in Italy, and his niece had married an Italian prince who was the mayor of Rome. And we all know of Rome as a mighty city, the eternal city. So that prince, Prince Don Emanuele Ruspoli of Italy, had lots of land throughout the nation of Italy, and he had lots of laborers, but they were not working. So Austin Corbin and Prince Don Emanuele Ruspoli put together a partnership where they would bring Italian families to Sunnyside Plantation there in Arkansas and establish a colony. And the way they would do it to get around immigration laws, because you could not immigrate someone into the nation at that time to work, they had to be land buyers. So Austin Corbin says, I will sell them 12.5-acre tracts. I'll charge them $160 an acre or $2,000 for 12.5 acres, charge them $100 for their home, and we'll finance it for them. And after 20 years, they will be homeowners. Well, this really excited the Italians because they could either stay in Italy and work forever and never be a homeowner, or they could come to America, and after 20 years, they would own their own home. Well, the only problem was this was a bit of a scheme because Austin Corbin and Prince Ruspoli had the price jacked up to 50 times the actual land value of the property. But the Italians, not knowing the language, did not realize this, and they did not know the property values. But because they were unaware of this, here they came, and roughly 1,000 Italians came from 1895 to 1897, all with hope. And when you get to this book, my mother does a fantastic job of sharing the stories of so many families on their journey to America and what transpires as their life evolves here at the Sunnyside Plantation in the United States. Well, they're coming over on the boats with great hope, great optimism, thinking they're going to find money laying all over the ground. You know how it is in California. There's just money everywhere. And that's exactly what they were expecting at the Sunnyside Plantation, with great freshwater artesian wells. But on the boat over, which was a 3-week journey, there was very little food, and reality set in. And so when they arrived in America, they see that the land is pretty much not cleared, that there's mosquitoes the size of what it looks like blackbirds, and there is rampant malaria, and it was an excruciating experience just from the start. And where did these Italians come from? As you see up on your map on the screen, they came from the northern region of Italy, from the Veneto, the Emilia-Romagna, and the Marche region. And the Marche region is where Don Floriani's family came from. And I saw on screen that I have a few cousins in and some other folks, Sunnyside followers from across the country. I see my cousin Christina, who lives there in Santa Rosa, has joined us. Her family was from the Veneto region. And I see Judy Biondini Martin is online with us, and her family from the Marche region. So I'm glad y'all are joining us here. This is a great group, the Rotaries. But in 1893, in the whole state of Arkansas, there was only 100 Italians. And with the formation of this colony at Sunnyside, the population increased by 10 times in just a 2-year period of time. And this is what they look like. These are very handsome people because they're all my family. They have wonderful genetics. On the bottom left, Christina, if you are watching, as I see you're watching online, they're your great-grandparents. And then this is what the Italians look like, just great people. And if you look here, here's another great Italian, Giovanni Floriani. And Giovanni Floriani had 6 children, and his oldest child was named Benvenuto. Benvenuto had 6 children, and he had a son named Herbert, and then Herbert had a son named Don Flo Floriani. So Giovanni here, who came to Sunnyside in 1904, He is the great-grandfather of your own member there, Don Flo Floriani. So there's some great people came to Sunnyside to find their fortune and find the land of opportunity. But unfortunately, in 1896, the great visionary Austin Corbin dies. And something else happened by 1897. 125 of the colonists died. That's approximately 15% of the colony died. And not only 15% of the colony died, but 100% of the colonists were affected by malaria. Now, I want you to perceive what a dire situation this was. I want to ask you there in the audience, have any of you heard of a condition called COVID? Well, guess how many people in the United States has died from COVID? It's not 15%, it's not 10%, it's not even 1%. It's 1/4%. And you can see how COVID panicked the entire nation and stalled our complete economy. If you can only imagine 15% of the colony dies and 100% is affected, this was a major panic. So the colonists here at Sunnyside, Arkansas are saying, oh my God, we got to get out of here. So they put together a committee and they sent out search parties across the South and up into the North to see if they could move the entire colony as one big group to a new place. Well, you won't believe it, but for the first time in Italian history, a problem occurred, and that was the Italians couldn't agree. And ever since this particular incident, Italians have never agreed on anything ever again. Just ask Don. You can never find two Italians to agree on anything. So the Italians started moving in various places. Right before they left, though, the plantation was taken over by Senator Leroy Percy and the Crittenden Land Company. Senator Leroy Percy was a hunting pal of President Theodore Roosevelt, and he took over the plantation. He leased it, and the first thing he saw was, oh my God, my labor force is about to leave. So he had to come up with a quick idea to get them to stay. So what he did, he turned to the colonists, the Italian colonists, and he said, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to tear up your contracts. You no longer own the land, and you're going to work for the fee I give you, and you're going to be happy, and you're going to have to pay for your priest. You're going to have to pay for your doctor bills, and we're going to charge you 10% for interest on everything that you borrow from the Sunnyside Company store. Well, the Italians said, that's not a great deal. And 80% of them left because Senator Leroy Percy's plan was not the greatest idea. So he now has to come up with new Italian families to bring them in from Italy. And he uses Italian labor brokers, and they paint these glowing terms in Italy how to bring Italians back to the Sunnyside plantation. And it was the glowing promises of the land is beautiful, artesian wells, no pestilence, and money was everywhere. And the colony was repopulating very quickly. But during this time, a study was done by several universities trying to see the effectiveness of the Italian laborer. And they found that the Italian laborer, because they were so eager to own their land and get out of debt from the Sunnyside Company, that they were highly productive and produced much more of a yield in their cultivation than did the African American and the white laborer. So that publication and that study made its way throughout the United States because this colony was watched from everywhere. Everyone wanted to know how this experiment with Italian labor would turn out. So all across America, people were trying to lure these colonists away from Sunnyside Plantation all throughout the United States. And so the exodus began in 1898 with 80% of the people leaving. Here's a few places they went. And if you go into Mother's book, it tells this migration story, the Italians of Sunnyside book, of where they go. And they head off in many small groups off to about 50 different communities and establish new Italian colonies. So going back to Senator Leroy Percy, who is now in charge, he is now full throttle on trying to bring in Italians to the Sunnyside plantation. He's got 13,000 acres to take care of. So what he did, he started paying Italian brokers to lie to the families in Italy, and he would pay $25 for each Italian family that had at least 4 men to come to America, or he would pay $5 per each Italian man. Now, if any of you are Italian men there in the audience, like Don and I, this is one of the sad and most tragic things that's occurred, because back then the Italian male was worth $5. And unfortunately, Don, I checked the stock market this morning, and the Italian male is only worth about $1.25 today. We are hoping that with this book that's come out, that the value of the Italian male will increase and maybe get back up to $5 where it used to be. So Leroy Percy is bringing all of these Italians in, and he gets them on the plantation. So why don't they run off like the first groups did in 1898? Well, he used a system of intimidation to keep the Italians on the Sunnyside plantation. As you remember in the very beginning, I showed you the demographic kind of picture, the landscape of the Sunnyside plantation. It was encircled completely by water, the big sea, with the Mississippi River on the right side or on the east side. There was only one way in and one way out. They had big gates, and so the Italian families could not escape. And they also used the intimidation of being lynched, because the most massive lynching in the United States history did not occur with African Americans. It occurred with Italian Americans, and that occurred in New Orleans in 1891, where 11 Italians were lynched, the worst lynching in U.S. history. After that, after the Italians arrived, they were very aware of this and very worried if the same fate would befall them. Well, similar lynchings occurred in St. Charles, Louisiana. 3 Italians were lynched. In Tallulah, Louisiana, just 60 miles away from the Sunnyside plantation, 5 Italians were lynched. And this right here was made well known to the Italians at the Sunnyside plantation. The message was this: if you try to escape and get away from the Sunnyside plantation, we got a noose ready for your neck. So the Italians were pretty much remaining there at the plantation after they were lured in under the fear of threat. Well, it got so bad that the Italians, who could not speak much English, were writing back to the Italian government complaining about what was going on. And so by 1907, and yes, Don, your great-grandfather was here at that time going through these hardships, the Italians were writing the Italian government, the Italian colonists were writing the Italian government. The Italian government started complaining to the Teddy Roosevelt administration. So Teddy Roosevelt said, okay, I'll send an investigator. Well, he was kind of blowing this off because remember, he's friends with Senator Leroy Percy, who's running the Sunnyside plantation. So how can he kind of sweep this under the rug, but also pacify the Italian government? Well, I'll appoint a special investigator. And lo and behold, I'll even appoint a female investigator, because everyone knows you won't, in 1890 and 1907, no one will take a female seriously. So Mary Grace Quackenboss was the first special agent and female investigator for the United States in history, and she ended up in Southeast Arkansas to investigate the horrific conditions that were occurring at Sunnyside. And here comes this epic battle, which is in the book, which is just fascinating, this battle of wits between the handsome, gorgeous Senator Leroy, as they say in the North, but it's actually Leroy down in the South, Leroy Percy, versus Mary Grace Quackenboss, who became known as the female Sherlock Holmes. She gains great stature from her fantastic work at the Sunnyside plantation. And the accounts in the book are just riveting, and I encourage you all to read it. So the Quackenboss investigation, she came down very determined, and she found horrific stories of mistreatment and survival with the Sunnyside colonists. There was a system of peonage that was employed by Leroy Percy and the Sunnyside plantation. As you see up on your screen there is a Sunnyside coin. Well, the way the Italians were paid after their land was taken back away from them and their contracts torn up, the Sunnyside company said, we're going to pay you X amount of dollars to farm the land, but everything you buy from the store is on credit. So the food you buy, the mules you use to plant the cotton, the implements you use that you borrow, you're going to be rented, and where you're going to be charged to your account, and you will build up this big debt. And by the way, when you came to America, we paid for your passage, so that's on your debt as well. But each year we're going to pay you for for the work you do, and we're going to pay you with Sunnyside currency. Well, one big problem. If you dared leave the Sunnyside plantation, you were at your own risk. But if you did leave the Sunnyside plantation, where else could you use this Sunnyside money? Nowhere. It was only useful at one place, and that was the Sunnyside store on the Sunnyside plantation. So there was total, absolute control, economic control of the Italian colonists using this system of currency and debt to the plantation. And Quackenbos, Mary Grace Quackenbos characterized it as white slavery. And in fact, the ambassador from Italy, who investigated the situation as well, said it was worse than the slavery that was employed before the Civil War. So Mary Grace Quackenbos has this great case to bring against Senator Leroy Percy and the Sunnyside plantation, but Senator Percy has this great ace in the hole. He has President Roosevelt. And so President Roosevelt, as the charges are being brought against the plantation, he recalls Mary Grace Quackenbos. Not only does he recall Mary Grace Quackenbos, he and the Attorney General take her report and bury it in the National Archives. And it was never to be seen again. And this history was hidden until it was found by two researchers, Professor Randolph Bain and Ernesto Milani from Italy, found it in the National Archives in the 1980s. And again, this report came out in 1907 and 1908. So there was no relief for the family. The U.S. government did not provide them any relief at all at that time. So Senator Percy looks like he has it made. Everything's going well, but there was a flood that occurred in 1916. There was another flood that occurred in 1927, the Great Mississippi Flood. Cotton prices go plummet. The Great Depression hits, and the economic circumstances just make the plantation go bankrupt. Well, this was bad news for the plantation, but the tracts of land of the plantation, what transpired, it became so cheap that many of the Italian families started buying pieces of the Sunnyside plantation. And so now they're on their own. Finally, this desire that they had to own their own land and their own homes was finally coming true due to the disasters that befell the Sunnyside plantation. So it seems like the Italians now were on their way. But oh no, it did not happen. Because, well, here's the Italian community in 1926, where they're robust and happy and just now starting to get their footing. But then, in the early 1940s, look what happens here. Italy goes to war against the United States. And who falls under suspicion? No other than the Italians throughout the country, and especially at Sunnyside Plantation. So the United States government decided specifically at Sunnyside to have the U.S. Postal Service monitor the Italians at Sunnyside. And I knew this postmaster. He was a very nice gentleman, and he took his job very seriously. And he watched the Italians at Sunnyside so closely. He watched their every move, and he watched them so close that he decided to marry one of the Italian women there at Sunnyside. And everything, they found that the Italians were not going to be disloyal. They were not going to be against America. And in fact, many of the Italians were actually joined the U.S. Armed Forces in World War II in fighting against their own native countries as their native land and against the Germans. And so they were very proud to establish their roots in America. And by 1944, for example, my grandfather, Giuseppe Borgononi, after 42 years, he finally became a U.S. citizen. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother, it took her 50 years. On my mother's side, my grandfather took 30 years. And so the Italians were very proud to endure all the hardships, endure the bigotry that occurred during World War II, endure the hard mistreatment that occurred in the 1910s, and we're very proud to become Americans. And so many people ask, well, why do we not hear about this story? Well, many times, because of the report was buried, but also our ancestors, just like yours, Don, they didn't talk about it because they thought it was bad to speak against America. They were proud to be Americans. They had earned the right to be Americans, and they thought it would be unpatriotic to speak negatively about their country. So that's why this story was never really shared with their own children and grandchildren. I'm going to tell you a little story here real quickly about the descendants. We have so many Italians that came through Sunnyside and dispersed all across America. An aunt of mine, she moved to Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis became a big hub for Italians also that left the southeast Arkansas. Her name was Dale Borgononi. She met a gentleman named Carlos Taylor, and she established a restaurant, a woman entrepreneur in the 1940s. She moved into this building that you see right here in the middle of your screen. Her family picture is on the left. She was one of 11 children to the two immigrants that were at Sunnyside. My father is also in this picture on the bottom left corner. But in that middle building there, she established, Dale Borgononi Taylor, descendant of Sunnyside, established a restaurant in the 1940s. 3 months later, after she established that restaurant, Sun Studio established a recording studio right next to it. If you see that second story building there, she boarded many people like Johnny Cash, Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins. So Dale Borgononi Taylor was right next door to Sun Records, where the $1 Million Quartet was established. But one interesting thing about the owner of Sun Records, Sam Phillips here on the far left, he did not have an office. So his office was in the restaurant established by an Italian lady. And if you look at the second bullet point here, it says Sam Phillips, who claimed he did not have a desk, had his own booth at Taylor's restaurant, Taylor Borgononi's restaurant. That's where all the guys did their writing and talking, and that's where the sound was really born. So I can tell you that we have Italians from the Italian descendants all over the United States, and some people give credit, especially Sun Studio gives credit to the sound of rock and roll being born at an Italian restaurant in Memphis, Tennessee. So as I mentioned to you, there are descendants from the Italians of Sunnyside all across the United States. We are not extinct. Over 1 million in all 50 states. We keep our traditions. Our pasta dinner has been ongoing since 1896, and it still continues to this day. There's a picture of my wife making bread. There's a picture of my mother, the author of the book, on the right-hand side. Back in the 1940s, she was touring the Mississippi, Arkansas Delta, and she still gives tours today. She's the historian emeritus for the Italians of Sunnyside Foundation. Sunnyside today is one of the largest Italian communities in Arkansas. It's the catalyst event that brought thousands of Italians to America. Over 1 million Italians from all over or all across this nation. It's a riveting history. I hope you get the book because it will tell you fascinating things that will just keep your interest. Speriamo di vederti presto, saying that we hope you come visit us down in the Arkansas Delta. Have a great museum. We have great land tours, the plantation, an Italian cemetery. It's all great. You can follow us on Facebook. We have a website, italiansofsunnyside.org. We hope you share the book and your heritage. That professor who founded the Quackenboss Archives, he said to my mother, I've read the book. I've been devouring it for hours. It's beautifully written, generously illustrated, creatively organized, a book that any historian will be very proud of. We're proud of this book. We believe that you all will enjoy it if you get it. And I was so grateful to be here with you all. I want to say grazie mille, tantissimo grazie. It was a pleasure to be with you, and thank you all very much.